landscape setting at MennoniteVillage.org.
The following program contains language and material which may be objectionable to some viewers.
Previously on the Abolitionists.
The louder she screamed, the harder he whipped.
Mother, it is my duty to bear testimony against...
Angelina, mind your own business.
It is my business, and it's your business too.
White women did not strike out on their own in this way, and Southern white women certainly did not. This is disobedience to proper society.
I was a changed being after that fight. I was nothing before. I was a man now.
On the subject of slavery, I will not excuse, I will not retreat a single inch, and I will be heard. I am willing to be persecuted, imprisoned, and bound for advocating African rights.
I feel, my Theodore, that we are the two halves of one whole, and that the Lord has given us to each other.
All kind of rumors had been flying about the wedding and the guest list and the social mixing that had gone on.
Southerners decide, oh, we're being attacked, and you need to bring these scoundrels to justice. They must be kidnapped. They must be assassinated.
Exclusive corporate funding for American Experience is provided by Liberty Mutual Insurance.
I'm Sacagawea. I helped Lewis and Clark discover the West. I'm Sacagawea. I helped Lewis and Clark discover the West.
There's more to Sacagawea than Lewis and Clark. Dive deeper into the story of America. Liberty Mutual Insurance, proud sponsor of American Experience.
Major funding for American Experience is provided by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to enhance public understanding of the role of technology. The foundation also seeks to portray the lives of men and women engaged in scientific and technological pursuit. Major funding for the Abolitionists is provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Additional funding is provided by the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, the Yawkey Foundations, and by Documentary Investment Group member, the Gretchen Stone Cook Charitable Foundation. American Experience is also made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Frederick Douglass had heard the stories. Every slave had. Whispered accounts of fugitives running from the slave catchers for nights on end, coming within sight of freedom, only to hear the hounds closing in. Fugitives starving, freezing to death, being torn apart by wild animals. Everyone knew what would happen if you were caught. Flogging, branding, elaborate tortures designed to strike terror into any other would-be runaways. Some lost hope and returned to their masters. Others killed themselves rather than go back to slavery. But some made it. In the fall of 1838, Frederick Douglass leapt aboard a train in Baltimore, slipped through the gauntlet of slave catchers prowling the border between slave and free states, and finally boarded a ferry bound for New York City. Only 24 hours removed from slavery, Douglass found himself wandering among the dazzling wonders of Broadway.
A free state around me, and the free earth under my feet. What a moment this was for me. A whole year was pressed into a single day. A new world burst upon my agitated vision.
Douglas had planned his escape with the help of Anna Murray, a free black woman he had met in Baltimore. Anna had sewn his sailor disguise and sold her feather bed to give him the money he needed. As soon as she joined him in New York, they were married in a safe house by a fellow runaway. There was no time to rest. New York was crawling with bounty hunters. With $5 to their names, Frederick and Anna headed further north. Their destination was New Bedford, Massachusetts, a whaling town known as an abolitionist stronghold with a large population of free blacks and runaway slaves. Frederick and Anna clawed their way out of desperate poverty and built a life for their growing family. For 3 years, Douglas shoveled coal, cut wood, and loaded ships, often working 2 shifts a day. He did make time to attend anti-slavery gatherings and was an avid reader of the most prominent abolitionist newspaper of the day, William Lloyd Garrison's The Liberator.
I not only liked, I loved this paper and its editor. He seemed a match for all the opponents of emancipation. Its words were few and full of holy fire.
When Douglas heard that Garrison was going to address an anti-slavery convention in Nantucket, he took a rare few days off and boarded a ferry for the island. As Douglas listened to the proceedings, a friend from New Bedford unexpectedly called on him to speak. As I made my way to the stage, Douglas recalled, I was shaking in every limb.
My mother was named Harriet Bailey. I can't recollect of ever seeing her by the light of day. We were separated when I was but an infant. My father was a white man. It was whispered that my master was my father, but of this, I know nothing. What I do know is that my master was a very cruel man. I was just a boy, hushed, terrified, stunned. That is slavery.
Mr. Douglas. I have never seen an audience so captivated. I myself was carried away, as you saw.
I was so nervous I could barely stand.
You were wonderful. If you don't mind my asking, how did you first realize that you were a slave?
Slowly. I was raised by my grandmother. We lived far from the slave quarters, and so I didn't know what went on there. And one day when I was 6 years old, my grandmother was told to walk me to the workhouse near the master's place. She sent me over to play with the other children and abandoned me there.
Dear Lord.
She loved me, but she had no choice.
What a horrible crime. An innocent child. Why were you raised by your grandmother? What about your mother?
My mother? I only saw her a few times at night. She was taken away after I was born to work as a field hand 12 miles away. She walked all the way back a handful of times, but even so, they never let me know her enough to really love her. That left a hole I can't express it.
My mother left me too. I was 5. She worked in another town for a few years. I missed her terribly. But that was nothing compared with...
No, it's never nothing.
My dear Mr. Douglas, join me. I urge you. You have a gift. Sir, you really do.
You flatter me.
No. No, I don't.
Mr. Garrison, you must understand how unexpected this is. I never imagined...
You have an opportunity to strike a blow for the slaves who continue to suffer as we speak. Did the Lord give you these gifts so that you could spend your life working in the shipyards?
I see now why you are such an effective advocate.
You do it then.
I think I will.
Put on the whole armor of God.
Douglas's new life was fraught with danger. He was a fugitive. By speaking out in public, he risked capture by bounty hunters. But he understood that his testimony could help transform the struggle. Garrison and his followers had failed to convert the slaveholders. Now, they hoped to deprive them of their financial and political support in the North. Douglas and his fellow agents were sent out to recruit the foot soldiers for this campaign, the men and women who would organize boycotts, raise money, and petition Congress.
You must not give or take any quarter. You must cleave slavery to the ground. Thank you. Now, I would like to introduce to you a graduate from the peculiar institution. He can bear witness to the true nature of that institution. His diploma is written on his back. Mr. Frederick Douglass.
Douglas is something really, really special.
Tell your story, Frederick.
And Garrison can sense that this is a way to really make the abolitionist cause incarnate.
Many of the audience members had never, ever seen a slave, let alone been to the slave South. So to have a person like Douglas gave the anti-slavery cause teeth. It gave it authenticity. It gave it a new voice.
Over the course of a few months, Douglas traveled 3,500 miles. The campaign was bearing fruit. Northerners were flooding Congress with anti-slavery petitions. When the House passed a gag rule forbidding their consideration, it added to Northern suspicions that the government was operating for the benefit of slaveholders. Abolitionists had driven another wedge into the fractures of the Union. But for Douglas, that wasn't enough. He wanted to effect change directly. When he heard that a fellow runaway had been captured, he saw a chance to enlist Garrison and his followers.
Dear friend Garrison, slavery, our enemy, has landed in our very midst. George Latimer has been hunted down like a wild beast and imprisoned in Leverett Street Jail.
George Latimer had arrived in Boston in the fall of 1842, only to be thrown in jail at the request of a Virginia planter.
Boston has become the hunting ground of merciless man-stealers. We need not point to the sugar fields of Louisiana or to the rice swamps of Alabama for the bloody deeds of this soul-crushing system, but to the city of pilgrims.
Garrison and the other abolitionists took up the call. Soon, Boston was in an uproar. Fearing an assault on the jail, the sheriff released Latimer, and his master had no choice but to set him free. For abolitionists, it was a stunning victory. But they weren't done. In a show of strength, they collected 65,000 signatures, bound the documents together, and rolled them like barrels into the State House. In March of 1843, Massachusetts complied with their demands by passing the Personal Liberty Act. State officials could never again take part in the recapture of a fugitive slave. Within a few years, almost every other northern state had followed suit. The personal liberty laws set alarm bells ringing throughout the South.
Southerners have a right to be outraged. Here we have proof positive that there is an utter disregard for the compromises that have been made to found this American Republic, to try to keep this thing running.
You see the South rising to say, this is yet another assault on our way of life. This cannot be.
With every headline, every petition, every controversy, the abolitionists were dragging the fight over slavery to the center of national life. And that fight was starting to tear the country apart. By the winter of 1845, Frederick Douglass had been touring the anti-slavery circuit for 4 years. As he contemplated his future, Douglass could imagine himself traveling forever in the shadow of his white mentors, repeating his story to small gatherings of the curious and the converted.
"Tell your story, Frederick," would whisper my friend William Lloyd Garrison as we stepped upon the platform. I could not always obey, for it did not satisfy me to simply narrate wrongs. I felt like denouncing them. Besides, I was growing and needed room.
That winter, Douglass decided to reach out to a vast new audience. Throwing caution to the winds, he published the story of his life.
I was born in Tuckahoe, in Talbot County, Maryland. I have no accurate knowledge of my age. By far, the larger part of slaves know as little of their age as horses know of theirs. And it is the wish of most masters to keep their slaves thus ignorant.
It's an expose about, of course, the horrible treatment of slaves. It's also an example of how the institution of slavery not only degrades slaves, but it degrades the master.
Douglass listed dates, places, and most dangerous of all, his owner's name. One white friend read the document and advised Douglass to burn it. Should Douglass's owner ever want to reclaim his property, he warned, there was nothing anyone could do to protect him. Douglass would have none of it.
It was truly a cultural event when he did publish it. It was an immediate and an immense bestseller. That narrative was published in 1845, By 1846 to 1847, Douglass was a household name in the United States.
Among those who read the book was Douglass's owner, Thomas Auld. He called Douglass a liar and vowed to track him down and send him to the cotton fields of the Deep South. Douglass fled the country for Great Britain. There, he could carry on Garrison's campaign to isolate the South by urging Britons to cut ties with American slaveholders. The experience would change his life.
Douglass's time in Britain was the first time in his life where he experienced a dearth of racism. It was the first time where he could walk down the street and not have someone spit at him, not have someone scowl and call him a nigger. That was the first time he could walk into any public establishment and not have someone kick him out.
As Douglass's narrative became a bestseller, he was treated by his British hosts not just as an equal, but as a celebrity. Most important of all, for the first time in his life, Douglass was free.
His British sympathizers sent Thomas Auld a note saying, "We have your slave, let's negotiate. He's probably worth $1,500, $2,000, we'll give you $800. Try to recover him." The Aulds agreed to it. So when Douglass returns to the United States, he's legally free. Douglass loved England and Ireland and Scotland so much that he almost stayed there. The only reason that he decided to return to the United States is because he felt a sense of responsibility and obligation to his fellow blacks.
Douglass had fled the United States alone, a fugitive running for his life. When he left London to return home in the spring of 1847, 1,400 people came to see him off. Shortly after landing in Boston, Douglass joined Garrison for a speaking tour of Ohio. "I seem to have undergone a transformation," Douglass told his old mentor. "I live a new life." At each stop, Garrison was reminded that his protege was coming to eclipse him. At one of their first appearances, Garrison couldn't even finish his speech as the audience drowned him out with chants of "Douglass, Douglass." And Douglass had a secret. His friends in Britain had raised money so that he could launch his own anti-slavery newspaper. He quickly realized that Garrison and his allies were vehemently opposed to the notion, so Douglass kept his old mentor in the dark. A few weeks into the tour, the relentless pace and grueling conditions began to tell on Garrison. In Cleveland, he spoke to 3 large rallies in a single day, standing for hours in a cold rain. That evening, Garrison collapsed. For 3 days, he was lost in a terrifying haze of fever and delirium.
My dear wife, I'm going to try to write you a few lines with my own hand. I have lost 20 pounds and am quite thin and weak.
Douglass reluctantly left Garrison in Cleveland to finish the speaking tour on his own. His secret leaked out shortly after he left Garrison on his sickbed.
Garrison has to learn that this man that he mentored and his close friend is leaving him, abandoning him, and Douglass doesn't even tell him firsthand. He saw himself as responsible as anyone for Douglass's success, for Douglass's fame, for Douglass's popularity. He never forgives Douglass.
My dear wife, is it not strange that Douglass has not written a single line to me since he left me on a bed of illness? In regard to his project for establishing a paper, he never spoke a word to me on the subject. nor asked my advice in any particular whatsoever. Such conduct grieves me to the heart.
In the fall of 1847, a few weeks after leaving Garrison, Douglas moved to Rochester, New York. Just over the border from Canada, Rochester was the last stop on the Underground Railroad, the network of safe houses used by slaves fleeing north to safety. The city's vibrant abolitionist community welcomed Douglas with open arms. As soon as he arrived, Douglas set about producing his own paper, naming it after the most potent symbol of the Underground Railroad.
Most fugitives, if they knew anything about the route to freedom, it was follow the North Star. Douglas's location allows him to be very involved in the Underground Railroad. He wrote that in the mornings he would come and find 10 or 11 fugitive slaves sitting on the doorstep, waiting for him to arrive in his office so that he could help shuttle them to Canada.
For the first few months, Douglas's newspaper hemorrhaged money. He had few subscribers and no experience as either a printer or a businessman. He mortgaged his house to pay his debts and looked about to give up when a friend arrived from Britain to help. Julia Griffith's editorial skills and business savvy kept the North Star afloat. But her appearance in Rochester sparked rumors, and when she moved into Douglas's home, those rumors blossomed into a full-blown scandal. Douglas brushed the talk aside. He was invigorated in his new surroundings. Far from Garrison's Boston headquarters, Douglas was free to explore the political and even militant anti-slavery strategies that were circulating in Rochester. As he did so, he made the acquaintance of a man whose name he had heard in whispers, failed tanner and fervent abolitionist John Brown.
May I get you anything else, Mr. Douglas?
Thank you. No, Mrs. Brown. A meal like this is a rare pleasure these days.
The pleasure is ours, Mr. Douglas. I'd hoped to meet you long before this.
I'm flattered, sir.
Your speeches have been an inspiration to us. I do wonder, though, whether speeches will ever be enough.
What do you mean, sir?
You've been at this for years.
Freedom is a long road, Mr. Brown. I don't know any shortcuts.
I do. Douglas, I do. Sir. God has placed these mountains here for a reason.
You know God's thinking?
I know these mountains. From here, we can strike a blow against the slave masters. The mountains are full of natural forts. One good man could hold off 100 soldiers. My plan is to take hand-picked men and post them in squads of 5 on a line here. They come down off the mountains, raid the plantations, bring off the slaves, offer them a chance to fight.
Sir, you have no idea. The entire state of Virginia will rise up against you. They will fight you tooth and claw.
Colored people must fight back. They will never respect themselves otherwise, nor will they be respected. I read your book, sir. You said yourself you became a man when you fought Mr. Covey.
I did, but I was young, and this is very different. We must follow in our Savior's footsteps. We must convert the sinner.
This is the sin right here. We sit here, all of us, debating this point of law, whether the Constitution says this or that. And in the meantime, day after day and year after year, the slaveholders are free to do their worst.
But if we stoop to bloodshed, we're no better than they are.
You can preach for all eternity and nothing will ever change. Mr. Douglas, how many slaveholders have you converted? How many slaves have you freed?
John Brown had a very beguiling personality. He was a stunning man. His sense of moral commitment was vivid and overwhelming. He was the real thing. And to a Frederick Douglass, he was also the real thing in terms of actually believing about as deeply as anybody Douglass had ever met in racial equality.
Soon after their meeting, Douglass described Brown in the North Star as someone who, though a white gentleman, is as deeply interested in our cause as though his own soul had been pierced with the iron of slavery.
Slaveholders have forfeited even the right to live. And if the slaves should put every one of them to the sword tomorrow, who would say that they deserve anything less than death?
As Douglass was meeting with John Brown, a chain of events was being set in motion that would transform the future of slavery and of America. In the spring of 1846, the United States went to war with Mexico, hoping to gain vast territories in the Southwest. Abolitionists bitterly opposed the war as an attempt to expand slave territory, but they were swept away by a national tide of patriotic enthusiasm.
The Mexican War ultimately increases the size of the United States by virtually 100%. It almost doubles the size. And the big question is, what are we going to do with all this land acquired from Mexico? Slave owners wanted it all to be slave territory. Anti-slavery Northerners all wanted it to be free territory.
The Mexican War unshucked slavery. It just took it out of its shell. All those efforts to contain this issue couldn't work anymore.
While Southerners saw the expansion of slave territory as a guarantee that the institution would continue to thrive, Northerners viewed those plans as a conspiracy to build a true slave empire.
Northerners become convinced that Southerners are hell-bent on moving slavery to every part of the country. And now you have this political fight going on over what's going to happen with that land. And that becomes very, very divisive very quickly.
Through 1847 and 1848, the question of the new territories festered. In the answer to that question lay the country's destiny. In the summer of 1849, the fight over slavery was suddenly eclipsed as cholera swept through cities across the country. Incessant rains flooded the streets with sewage that spread the epidemic with terrifying speed. Outside Cincinnati, Harriet Beecher Stowe followed reports of the disease as it swept through the slums downtown. Stowe had hoped to become a writer, but now she was too busy raising 6 young children on very little money. It was all she could do to send accounts of home life to her husband, who was working out of town for the summer.
Yesterday, I went downtown and found all gloomy and discouraged. A universal panic seems to be drawing nearer than ever before. Hearse drivers have scarce been allowed to unharness their horses. Furniture carts and common vehicles are being employed for the removal of the dead.
Stowe had every reason to hope that her family would be spared. They lived far from the tenements, where the poor were being decimated. She kept the children close to home and maintained a cheerful disposition. But at the beginning of July, Charlie, Stowe's beloved little boy, was taken ill.
She called him her summer child. Harriet wrote such glowing praise of Charlie that her husband was actually disturbed by it. She said she never had such an easy time with a baby. And indeed, it was the first baby she was able to nurse herself.
I could not help, nor soothe, nor do one thing to mitigate his cruel suffering. Do nothing but pray that he might die soon.
And it was a terrible disease. You lost all the fluids in your body, you were racked by convulsions, and there was nothing that anybody could do.
At last, it is over, and our dear little one is gone from us. My Charlie, my baby, so loving and sweet, so full of life and hope and strength, now lies shrouded, pale and cold in the room below.
In the Calvinist scheme of things, if God sent you suffering, it was because he loved you and he wanted to teach you something. Stowe later wrote that there were circumstances of such great bitterness about the manner of his death that she didn't think she could ever be reconciled for it unless his death allowed her to do some great good to others.
For Harriet Beecher Stowe, the wound of Charlie's death would never heal. Rather, she came to understand the pain of mothers she would never know.
It was at his dying bed and at his grave that I learned what a poor slave mother may feel when her child is torn away from her.
She was really fueled by the grief for her baby, but I suspect too, perhaps anger at a Calvinist God. The writing of Uncle Tom's Cabin would be Harriet's way of making her baby's short life mean something.
In the spring of 1850, the question of the territories seized in the Mexican War finally exploded in the gravest crisis in the nation's history. California wanted to be admitted to the Union as a free state. If that happened, the balance of power in Washington would shift against the slave states. Southerners perceived a mortal threat and talked openly of secession. Representatives brandished revolvers in the halls of Congress, and the nation contemplated the imminent collapse of the Union. For Garrison and many other abolitionists, it seemed that the slave power might finally suffer a fatal blow. But in the fall of 1850, the country stepped back from the brink when Congress adopted what became known as the Great Compromise. In return for allowing California to join the Union as a free state, Southerners were granted the prospect of someday forming slave states in Utah and New Mexico. But for Northerners, the most galling provision in the compromise was the Fugitive Slave Law. The law stipulated that any citizen, North or South, could be rounded up and forced to catch a suspected runaway.
Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 virtually legitimates the kidnapping of free blacks. It means that A Southerner can hunt down any black in free soil and say, "You're my slave." And most significantly, in one sense, any white can be deputized at any moment, day or night, and is required to help round up a suspected fugitive slave.
When the compromise was finally sealed in late September, abolitionists were horrified. 20 years of struggle had yielded not emancipation, but 1 million more slaves, and a political agreement to preserve the institution in the United States forever. The petitions, the campaigns, the rallies, the marches, the meetings and resolutions and fundraisers, the mobs, the beatings, all of the sacrifices had been suddenly dealt away by a handful of men in Washington. As a final insult, abolitionists were cast as villains who had almost torn the nation apart. The New York Globe urged that no public building, not even the streets, must be desecrated by such a gathering of traitors. It became dangerous once again to speak out against slavery.
You just had a huge blow to your belief that somehow you're going to end slavery in this country by appealing to the Christian soul of the country. What the country just said from the heart of the government is that slavery's forever. This radicalizes the anti-slavery movement arguably more than anything that had ever happened before.
The crisis convinced Garrison that he needed to redouble his efforts. From Boston, he directed an energetic campaign of meetings, petitions, and publicity. But for many abolitionists, Garrison's old tactics seemed hopelessly inadequate. Frederick Douglass, for one, had begun to question his own faith in a peaceful end to slavery and in American democracy itself.
Your boasted liberty is an unholy license. Your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns are fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There's not a nation on earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour. It is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake.
Douglass needs for slavery to be eradicated, and he needs it to happen as quickly as possible. In many ways, he reflects this for the rest of Black America, that while Garrisonian tactics were just, earnest, they simply were not options that he thought would eventually lead to the end of slavery.
On the one level, you hate to reduce it to race. On the other, it's a reality. No matter how many stories Garrison hears, no matter how many coffles he sees, no matter how many mothers he can imagine and conjure up, Douglass has had that experience. Garrison is a white man in a white man's America.
When Douglass questioned Garrison's doctrines at a meeting of the Anti-Slavery Society, he was branded an enemy. A volley of insults and allegations appeared in the Liberator. Douglass struck back, accusing Garrison of racism. The final blow came when Garrison published ugly insinuations about an affair between Douglass and Julia Griffiths.
Garrison has hit Douglass below the belt. It's like a family quarrel where they're airing each other's dirty laundry, and it's not a pretty sight.
Mr. Garrison has seen fit to invade my household and has sought to blast me in the name of my family.
Griffiths would eventually bow to the pressure and move back to England. But for the remainder of the 1850s, William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass would not speak to each other. Not long after the passage of the Fugitive Slave Law, a runaway knocked on the door of a house in Brunswick, Maine. As fate would have it, he had come upon the new home of Harriet Beecher Stowe and her family, including a newborn named after the baby they had buried in Cincinnati. Stowe was well aware of the punishment facing anyone who helped a runaway, but she was glad of the opportunity to defy the government. Before this law, I might have tried to send him somewhere else, she wrote her sister. As it was, all hands in the house united in making him up a bed. Like many Northerners, Stowe was deeply disturbed by the Fugitive Slave Law. For her, its cruelty was all too real. Every account of flight, of capture, tore at the agonizing memory of Charlie's death.
My heart breaks at the cruelty and injustice our nation inflicts on the slave. I am tormented by the thought of the slave mothers whose babes are torn from them. I pray to God to let me do a little and to cause my cry for them to be heard.
Leaving Cincinnati allowed Harriet to look back at those 18 years there and to process that experience of the slave riots, Charlie's death, the Fugitive Slave Law, and it all came together in a vision. Instead of Christ on the cross, she saw an image of a slave being whipped. And she wrote the ending of Uncle Tom's Cabin when Uncle Tom dies. And when she read it to her family, they were all crying and they said, "Mama, you've got to write the rest of the story."
On March 20th, 1852, a publisher released a book on a difficult subject by an unknown author. By the end of the week, Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel about the evils of slavery had sold 10,000 copies. Within 2 months, 50,000. 3 paper mills feeding 3 printing presses running 24 hours a day, and still the publisher couldn't keep up. Soon, Uncle Tom's Cabin began reaching vast new audiences, including many who had never read a novel when it was adapted as a wildly popular play. In Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harriet Beecher Stowe made millions of Americans see slavery for the first time through the eyes of its victims. The mother whose child was to be sold away. The boy watching helplessly as his sister is whipped. The runaway Eliza fleeing with her baby across the Ohio River, only 1 step ahead of the slave catchers.
And it was said that when the novel was put on stage, there was not one dry eye when Eliza reached the other side of the river. And Harriet knew that if she could get that response from her readers, she didn't need to make arguments about slavery.
She realizes that the way to do this was by playing on the heartstrings. You don't do it by playing on the outrage. You do it by convincing them that there are human beings in peril.
Mrs. Stowe has walked with lighted candle through the darkest corners of the slave's soul and has unfolded the secrets of the slave's lacerated heart. That contribution to our bleeding cause alone involves us in a debt of gratitude which cannot be measured.
It is the most popular book and the most influential book in American history. There is no competition for that title. It's going to convert millions of Americans, not to being for immediate abolitionism, not to being for racial equality, but for being against slavery. Now that's a huge thing. That's a sea change.
You can see Stowe taking aim at the Fugitive Slave Law in incident after incident and basically urging her readers to defy what she thought was an anti-Christian, undemocratic law.
William Lloyd Garrison attended a performance of the play in New York and marveled at the response of the toughs in the front rows.
Oh, it was a sight worth seeing. Those ragged, coatless men and boys in the pit, the very material of which mobs are made, cheering the strongest and sublimest anti-slavery sentiments.
Uncle Tom's Cabin triggered a wave of defiance to the fugitive slave law. Armed mobs broke into jails to release fugitives and even murdered slave catchers. And in the spring of 1854, this wave of resistance came to a head when the national battle over slavery suddenly focused on a solitary prisoner in Boston's city jail. Anthony Burns had fled Virginia and slavery by stowing away on a ship bound for the North. He had avoided capture for months until a letter home revealed his whereabouts. When news of the arrest filtered out, Boston erupted in anger. While one group tried to halt the proceedings through legal maneuvers, black and white activists mounted a desperate assault on the courthouse where Burns was being held. The attack was driven back by club-wielding policemen, but not before a guard was shot and killed. When the sun rose the next morning, Burns was still in jail, and the city was seething. When news of the upheaval reached Washington, President Franklin Pierce, an ardent Southern sympathizer, demonstrated the government's resolve. On June 2nd, 1854, all Boston watched as hundreds of U.S. Marines, cavalry, infantry, and artillery, along with the county militia and the Boston police, marched Anthony Burns from the jail to a ship waiting in the harbor.
For Garrison, the work of abolition was about trying to make people come to a moment of conscience and act accordingly. But one has to see the devil in order to then turn towards God. One has to see evil in order to be committed to a life of good. Slavery marches right up into Massachusetts. And now Northerners get to see the face of evil.
It seemed that the United States was committed to the preservation of slavery. Abolitionists were losing hope. They couldn't see that already they had shifted history. By refusing to disappear, to be silenced, to accommodate, they had forced millions of Americans to take a stand on slavery, one way or the other. The ties between North and South had been replaced by resentment and suspicion. Garrison, Douglas, Stowe, and their fellow abolitionists couldn't know it, but their long struggle had passed a tipping point.
Next time on The Abolitionists.
Perish all compromises with tyranny.
They're going to be butchered because that's Old Testament retribution.
The armory at Harper's Ferry. Come with me, Douglas.
Douglas suddenly becomes the most wanted man in the United States.
Starting the war! If we succeed, our glory as a nation will be complete.
The conclusion of The Abolitionists on American Experience. Exclusive corporate funding for American Experience is provided by Liberty Mutual Insurance.
The British are coming! The British are coming! My name is Paul Revere. One night in 1775, I warned everyone that the British were coming. The British are coming! The British are coming! My name is Paul Revere. One night in 1775, I warned everyone that the British were coming.
There's more to Paul Revere than a midnight ride. Dive deeper into the story of America. Liberty Mutual Insurance, proud sponsor of American Experience.
Major funding for American Experience is provided by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to enhance public understanding of the role of technology. The The foundation also seeks to portray the lives of men and women engaged in scientific and technological pursuit. Major funding for the Abolitionists is provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Additional funding is provided by the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, the Yawkey Foundations, and by Documentary Investment Group member, the Gretchen Stone Cook Charitable Foundation. American Experience is also made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you. Thank you. There's more American Experience online at pbs.org, where you can find out how to join the discussion on Facebook and Twitter. American Experience, The Abolitionists, is available on DVD. To order, visit shoppbs.org or call 1-800-PLAY-PBS. American Experience is also available for download on iTunes.
Be more. PBS.
On Masterpiece Classic.
Where's Sybil?
You abandon a pregnant woman in a land that's not her own while you run for it.
Other men have normal families.
No family is ever what it seems from the outside.
I've no time to talk, but tell them I'm all right.
Sybil?
Hello?
Downton Abbey on Masterpiece Classic.
Tune in Sunday night at 9.
Safe Corporation, providing workers' compensation insurance and services to help create safer workplaces. Online at safe.com.
The koala is renowned for its sedentary lifestyle, but scientists are discovering that their social life is coloured with rivalry and bellowing calls. By unlocking the koala communication code, we are lifting the veil on this Australian icon.
Wednesday at 8 p.m. here on OPB.
When 9/11 happened, I started getting all these anonymous phone calls. Why don't you go back to where you came from? And my first thought was, you want me to go back to Princeton, New Jersey? And watching the media and the news, the Muslims and Arabs are always the bad guy. And that's when I said, we really got to change the portrayals of who Muslims are on television in this country. So I came up with the idea to produce my own documentary. I sent a proposal to PBS, and they said, this is a story that needs to be told, and we're willing to help you tell it. So I found my subjects, 2 fantastic Americans, and I filmed them for a month. My local PBS station aired it, and then I saw the positive reaction and the difference that it made. The Muslim American community loved it. It gave them a newfound hope that they can finally be portrayed accurately on television in this country.
Outstanding programs on OPB are supported by a generous gift from the Robert D. and Marcia H. Randall Fund for Lifelong Learning.
On Nova, scientists race to uncover a 100,000-year-old mystery.
There was something about this lake that was dangerous.
An ancient world of fantastic creatures. But why did so many die here?
If you were there at the wrong time, something might kill you.
With only weeks remaining, can the riddles be solved? Ice Age Death Trap on Nova.
Wednesday night at 9 on OPB.
Next time on DCI Banks.
Just what you've always wanted, Annie. Your own murder.
Annie's first case is the killing of a quadriplegic.
Why take a Mars out to East Failmore and cut a throat?
And Alan is investigating the murder of a young woman.
Strangulation was a probable cause of death.
But the 2 cases are on a collision course.
It was about power, it was about control.
That will lead to the death of one of the team. DCI Banks.
Friday night at 9 here on OPB.